Hey everybody, this is Workforce Gaming. I am Doug, along with Brad.
Hey, everybody.
And this week we are going, or not me, not we. Brad is definitely, this is definitely a Brad one.
You mean you don't like Gears of War?
I haven't played Gears of War. I played about 10 minutes of Gears of War. Brad's going to review
I
Gears of
think
War 4.
I think this is that moment where Doug remembers that games other than VR still exist, because I don't feel like you've touched a non-VR game in about 3 weeks.
I tried playing Call of Duty Advanced Warfare and I kept trying to turn my head to look.
That's
like,
sad.
I was just like, this sucks.
Why isn't this 2 inches from my face?
Well, yeah, yeah, kind of. But to get into it, Brad, you've been a huge fan of Gears of War. I think
Yes,
you are a
indeed.
huge fan of Gears of War.
Yes,
You were a huge
indeed.
fan of Halo. You were an Xbox.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I was the Xbox diehard for years and years. Brute Force and Fable and all those great Microsoft franchises that are classics.
Brute Force, seriously?
Brute Force is a kick-ass game.
No, it wasn't. Okay, let's just get in.
14-year-old me loved Brute Force. Brute Force, I feel like, was a great prequel to Gears of War. I feel like Brute Force was what wanted to be what Gears of War is.
I I have not played Brute Force. I'm aware of the very generic cover of a lizard.
But we're not talking about Brute Force. So it's Gears of War 4.
Yeah.
But don't play Brute Force. It sucks. But anyway, Gears of War 4. So yeah, it's awesome. It's more Gears. So it's a little weird because this is the first one that wasn't worked on with Epic at all in the original kind of designers of it. Because this is the Coalition, which is now the Gears of War studio.
Totally forgot about that.
Yeah, because Microsoft has just decided to go 343, you're Halo. Coalition, you're Gears. They're just making studios up for their major properties.
And canceling whatever games they were actually working on before.
Exactly, because they're not important. We need sequels and sequels. But Gears of War 4 is a fantastic game. Yeah, so all the stuff that's always there for Gears. So you've got your multiplayer, your horde mode, and then your campaign. The campaign's a very, very good Gears of War story. It's very interesting how it plays out. So it's set 20 years in the future, and you're playing JD Phoenix as opposed to Marcus Phoenix. And it's much different than the other games because you start out, you're actually fighting robots for like the first like.
I had heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're fighting robots for like the first third of the game, which feels really stupid, and it kind of is.
First
like
third of the game.
Yeah, probably because it's only the campaign's probably only 7 hours. Maybe it's a short one. It's got that Call of Duty feel to it, where it's kind of like here's the campaign. It's there. You can have fun, but really the main draw are these other couple things.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you spend like the first third just fighting robots, which do tie in pretty well, and they're of course the robots are connected to a character from the original trilogy, and all that jazz. But it really picks up once you hit like the third of the way, or maybe even halfway through. It picks up like crazy, and that's where you get into meeting the Swarm, who are essentially the replacement for the Locust, who are destroyed in the end of the original games. So it's really cool to see because it's definitely a different take on it. It feels familiar, but one of the issues with Gears of War ended up being kind of that I've done this before feeling, because you're essentially fighting the same enemies over and over and over again for three straight games. Whereas in this one now you've got an entirely new species, which are very heavily influenced by the Locust, but they're different enough that it changes up some gameplays. Like there's one monster thing that actually, once you go down, because you can get down in the game, it'll actually like pick you up and start carrying you around, and like if that like runs away carrying your character, like that's the equivalent of dying.
Oh, weird.
So you're swallowed up by this thing, and you have to like shoot the stomach of it to like pop you back out, which is kind of a neat thing. Just that's like one of those weird things, like, oh, that's different. Like I don't ever remember doing that. Does this all make sense
in context of the story?
Yes, because essentially these people, the Swarm, are essentially harvesting humans in almost a Borg sense of the way, where it's like, we're gonna like assimilate them and turn them into these things. So it makes sense in context of the story. And one of the main plot points is a couple characters getting taken by these things as you go through the game, and then essentially the rest of the game is kind of trying to hunt down where they went.
Gotcha.
So I mean, the story for this is the very generic, like, oh, they took that guy, let's go get him. And that's essentially like, that's 80% of the story. The first little bit of the story is kind of this like, oh, what's happening with the cog, and now the cog is kind of this, group that there's some issue with, and they're kind of turning into this more totalitarian regime type of thing now that the locusts aren't there to kind of keep them in check and all this other kind of stuff. So there is some weird stuff that's really heavily hinted at that's really, really cool that I wish they got into more. And it's one of those like things that you see and you're like, God damn it, I know there's a book somewhere that's talking
I was just about to
that.
say, it's
and
like
I
wait
know,
for the Gears of War book and the miniseries and all the other crap.
I know it's in there somewhere, because there's some cool, like, there's one scene where it's within the first maybe hour or so. You walk into, they're like, oh, you have to go through the maternity ward, and it's this big building. You walk in, and there's all this, like, if you've seen the movie Gattaca, all this, like, oh, you can select your baby, and we need to genetically alter our babies to make sure that we can repopulate the species and make sure that we're getting the best genetic. Yeah. And it's all these weird propaganda posters, and it's the only time it comes up in the entire game. So
they don't really, they never explore that stuff?
They never explore it at all, but it's this, like, thing that you see in the first hour, and it's like, whoa, like, we need to sit down and have a conversation about this. This is cool.
I remember when this was first released, first announced, they'd sort of shown like a very survival horror aspect. It kind of seemed like that, kind of like Uncharted 4, I guess is the only thing I could really compare it to, where Uncharted 4 is like, this is going to be a very different take on the series. Does it have that feeling of being a very different take on the series? Because you're mentioning this, like, the cogs are now totalitarian, there's a new species, there's a new, like, at the end of the day, like, I mean, I guess I figure it still feels like Gears, but does it feel like a significant step, like, one way or the other?
Not particularly. It very much feels like that starting over point more than anything else. It feels like, what I almost feel like when you get to these long running series, almost what you want, where you get that point where, okay, we've kind of exhausted all this. Let's move forward a bit and start telling somebody else's story set within the universe we know, and take those influences from where we've been before and sit down and go, okay, we're still using this. These things still play a factor, but that's not really the main focus point of our story. So I feel like it doesn't really do what Uncharted did, where it's like, oh, this is like that crazy next step, and like I see where this is going, and this has a different feel and everything. It fits perfectly in line with 1 through 3 and Judgment. It fits perfectly in line with those games, and it's just kind of going, okay, that was Marcus's story. Now we're going to move on. We're going to kind of see what's going on now with his son 20 years later. And Marcus will be a part of that, of course, and the cog will be a part of that. But we're going to introduce some new characters. We're going to introduce a new thing. And there's new stuff going on. And it still has the same feel, but it's new, quote unquote.
Yeah, so I mean, like, did you feel like the characters, like, I feel like this is kind of like rating episode 7 almost. Like, do you feel like the new characters, like, were good, not replacements isn't the right word, but like, are you now interested in these characters? Like,
hell no.
Huh?
They're horrible.
Oh.
the best part of the game, and it's not a spoiler because it's been on every TV ad that you've seen on every TV station ever. The best part is when Marcus comes back, because you're like, oh, thank God, a character with personality. Because the characters are. That is my major issue with this game, is these characters have zero personality. They try really hard to get you to be like, oh, I care about these characters. But the best part is, like, it's Marcus. It's like, oh yeah, I'm playing with Marcus Phoenix, and he's sitting there doing his whole like Marcus Phoenix angry grunts about everything, while the other guys are just going like, oh yeah, there's guys over here. We should shoot. Oh man, we need to go find this person that was taken. That's sad. Which
that's a bummer.
That's really disappointing to me, because just again, like, when you look at like the trailers and stuff for this father-son relationship and the idea of like old man Marcus, so to speak, and then seeing what Uncharted did with Nathan Drake, you really get this feeling of like, oh, like there's going to be some evolution in the storytelling. There's going to be some evolution in these characters. And it's really not. The characters fall flat completely, which is weird, because if you look at Gears of War 3 in particular, the relationship they do between Dom and Marcus, and some of the things that they do with these characters in that game specifically, and I guess I can spoil it, like, since we're like 6 years past it, like the scene where Dom dies in Gears of War 3 is like this, there's this crazy awesome moment where he like sacrifices himself, and it's like this most, like, it's one of those like most depressing scenes in a video game, because it was done so well, and you're just like, oh my God, but like these characters is like, oh yeah, if they died, I'd be like, whatever. Oh yeah, what was that dude? Like, I couldn't even tell you, other than JD, I couldn't even tell you the other guys' names.
Would you have said it though? Like, because I mean, to be fair, with Gears of War 3, that was Gears of War 3. Like, you had.
I guess that's
games
true.
All those characters. Like,
but like,
I get. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you go back in time, like when you played Gears 1, would you have had the same feelings about those characters? Like, they were one note, they were.
But I mean, maybe, but those characters were at least like, they were mostly one note, but they were interesting, because you had, Cole comes in, and the scene where Cole comes in, you're like, oh my God, who the hell is this guy? Because he's just Gears of the original ones had these over the top characters. You know, Cole was the over the top, like, oh my god, I'm awesome and everything's great, and woo, I'm gonna yell and scream and run around. And you had Baird, who's the sarcastic asshole, and you know what I mean. The characters had they were very stereotypical, but that gave them more of a sense of individuality. Whereas these
Yeah.
just feel like the random future soldier guys.
Oh, that's kind of a
They all
bummer.
feel like they all kind of almost feel like Carmine in the original one, where it's like, oh yeah, this guy's gonna die sometime because I know nothing about him.
I almost feel kind of bad for him because I feel like, I mean, to be fair, like a company made a new Gears of War that you've like. It's really interesting because usually when we have these talks, especially when we like talk about Halo 5 and I guess Halo 4 as well. Like a big one of your talking points that you've mentioned before is like 343 took it over, and it felt like a very different game. It felt there's all these issues and things like that. But from what you're saying is like outside the characters, it seems like they did a pretty good job at least.
Oh, they did a
emulating.
damn good job. Yeah, gameplay wise, like feel all that stuff, they did a damn good job. The only place this falls flat is story. Everything else fits exactly what I want Gears of War. The new weapons are great, the environments are great, the enemies are great. It still is probably the best third person shooter out there in terms of just pure gameplay wise, but just it falls flat on the story. And the story is, again, I think we've talked about this before, where that's something that me and you tend to lean on when we're talking about games, is we always tend to go, okay, how's the story feel? And I think that's why Uncharted 4 sticks out so much to both of us, is that that's such a story rich game that these games where the story kind of takes a back seat are almost like, okay, whatever, like it was fun, but nothing really happened.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, but I mean, you like Gears forever, so I mean, do you think that the other Gears had stronger story, or is it just that it was just a different time when you were playing games differently?
I don't know, that's a good question, but I guess because I mean, in my mind, like, I'm looking at Gears, and 1 through 3, like I know the overarching story, but I guess when it comes down to specific games, like I don't know too much. And if you think, I guess going back to the first one, where it's just really you're just kind of like trying to hunt down and kill the locust, essentially that feels, I guess, similar to what this game is, because I just played Ultimate Edition, of course, like 6 or 7 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess this does have a very similar feel, where it's like, okay, these characters are just trying to survive this new menace, and they're trying to figure out how do I destroy it, and you end up going, to kill one of the major pieces of this group. Whereas, you get through Gears of War 2 and 3, and it's, okay, these things have transformed, they're now using this, and we need to go and destroy all of them, and do we destroy the planet, or do we just destroy them? And you get all these bigger decisions. So I guess if you think of it as a startup of a new series almost,
Mm-hmm.
it does kind of have that first game of like, okay, I guess this is kind of just our introduction to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, yeah, it's the beginning. Yeah, exactly. Of like the beginning of two more. It's not. It's the first third of a story essentially. I assume this. I can't imagine. Well, I'm not going to ask you the ending, but just for how this Microsoft likes to set up series, I can't imagine this doesn't end on some sort of cliffhanger or some sort of like next time on.
Actually, it really doesn't. Like, if you look at the story this game is trying to tell, it doesn't, which is
Really,
kind of
that's actually
shocking
really
almost.
interesting.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely that, like, okay, there's more to tell here, but it's not that, like, I'm just picturing, like, Halo 2, where you're just like seeing the Covenant, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
doing their thing, and there's like, or you see like the swarms like invading a city now. It's going, oh shit, what are we gonna do now? It doesn't have that moment. It's more of this, okay, we wrap this story up, but this thing's still here. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, the story it was trying to tell is definitely complete, because the story essentially is, we're going to rescue these two characters. That gets resolved in some way, in a meaningful way, and then there's still this swarm, and you still now that know that these people are now introduced to this world, but it's much more of a, like, kind of those lingering questions, as opposed to that cliffhanger, like, oh my god, what's gonna happen?
Yeah, because it feels like what you were saying with that whole like totalitarian government with like the cogs and stuff. Like, I would be actually very interesting, like considering because I have heard a little bit about that. Like, there's like some very interesting backstory that they're not exploring yet. But it'd be
Yes,
interesting.
for
I
sure.
do. I'm sure they're gonna set up to eventually where you might actually be fighting cogs. I could see something like that probably being set up. That sounds interesting
There
to me.
there will absolutely, I can guarantee that will come up if they continuing following the path that they're on now, is setting up a point where there's this battle between the characters you're playing in this game, the cog and the swarm, all at once, kind of happening, in this idea of like, which side is actually the best, that kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing of like, do we go with the military government that's trying to do this but has the best chance of winning, or do we have to fight them and fight the little monster? There's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff that could be explored with this, which is really cool. And I think really opens up good possibilities for 5 and 6, which I would assume are coming. I don't think they've been officially announced, but let's be honest, this is going to go for forever. Um, but yeah, it's good. And if you like Gears of War, I mean, it's one of those games that I think falls into more of the, this is a great, amazing gameplay experience, and the story is just kind of there to kind of give
Facilitate it.
backdrop to the gameplay,
Hmm.
which is fine. And that's the way that some series just go. There are series that have built awesome franchises around that, and Gears, I think, has always been more about that. What can we do gameplay wise with this story on top of it? And never really been a huge selling point of the story. It's always been more based on that gameplay, especially when you figure that, I mean, the whole idea of like horde modes and stuff essentially started with this, which I didn't get too much into horde mode with this. They added in a weird mechanic that I do not appreciate. And I don't even remember if it was there in Judgment or not, but there's like the like, it got tower defensey, and I don't do that.
Hmm.
It got
What?
lots of like, it got tower defensey where it's like, oh, now you have
Oh,
money
gotcha.
and now you can buy turrets and set up the turrets where you want. And it's like, no, I want to go hold up in my barn and have the locusts run at me, and I have my shotgun and I shoot them all, and then they're
Just
all
like the
dead, and I go
last
run up
five
and
games.
yes, I want the last five things, but looking prettier on my Xbox One. That's really what I
It
wanted.
does sound
But
like you got most of that though.
essentially, yeah, essentially that's what it is. The versus multiplayer is fantastic. I put several hours into that. It's great. It works just like it always has. It's awesome. Um, yeah, it's an awesome game. If you have any interest in Gears, it's definitely it's what I would have wanted.
Hmm.
I didn't need another story with Marcus and Cole running around shooting stuff. I wanted, it's that feeling of like, okay, there's some evolution here. Yes, the characters fall flat. Yeah, the story's not great, but you're pushing the universe forward. We're not just
Hmm.
stuck in the same spot, which is cool.
That's kind of cool. All right. Yeah. So I guess you like Gears. Get Gears.
Yeah, seems like an obvious statement, but do that.
Yeah. No, I'm actually kind of glad. I think it's good. Even as a PlayStation fan, I'm always glad that there's like Microsoft still has like some pretty damn good games. Like so, Sony has that's like compete with that.
Competition
I
is
think
good.
Gears is more interesting than Uncharted, like by far. Like I like Uncharted series. I don't like Uncharted series actually that much, and I always was jealous of Gears because like I was like, man, Gears is just such a cooler version of that.
Yeah, Gears is kick ass. I love Gears.
Yeah. All right, we are Workforce Gaming. You can follow us at Workforce Gaming on Twitter. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. If you like what you heard, comment, share it with people. I guess we'll see you next week.
See ya.